If there are any non-Jewish listeners here, stop eating so much mayonnaise.
Greetings, dear listeners. Today we have a very special episode coming to you on location from Left Coast, USA, Redwood City, California. We have the distinct honor and pleasure to be talking with Boris Feldman, who's a partner and global co-head of TMT sector at Freshfields. So without further ado, let's get this conversation started.
It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure. And we're sitting here at Freshfields, and what an honor. And we're having so much fun already before we started this, coming off of Shabbat together. And so we're glad to just jump into this. I guess one of the things that I've been wondering for a long time is, why do you have such a strong connection to the Jewish people, for starters?
My circumcision was a deeply traumatic event, and I've spent the next 69 years trying to understand it. So I think it all began on day 8. That's why Jews aren't alcoholics, right? That was their first taste of wine.
The association is negative.
Yeah, you reach for a glass of Merlot and all of a sudden things start twitching.
That's more like Manischewitz, yes.
My parents were survivors. Our Jewish identity was key to our family life growing up, and it's been key to my family as we've raised our children.
So how is your Jewish experience now? Can you compare that to growing up in South Bend, Indiana, and with immigrant parents?
California is a different world for a Jew. So when we grew up, we were surrounded by anti-Semitism all the time. We were in a neighborhood that was largely Polish and German Catholics. It was in the 60s, and they were, on the whole, not everyone, but on the whole, deeply anti-Semitic.
How did that manifest itself?
The day my parents moved into the first house they bought, where they raised their family, the Polish woman across the street stepped out into the middle of the street in front of their house, bent over, lifted her skirt and said, "Kiss my blank, dirty Jews." So it was it was the welcome wagon of South Bend to the new neighbors. And it was a neighborhood with, the only Jews in the neighborhood were my family, my aunt's family, and my grandmother. And it was a period of intense anti-Semitism from people in that community. California is totally different. People here have much less of an ethnic identity. Leaving aside sort of recent campus stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about, from the left over Gaza. In general in California, people often don't even know you're Jewish. So for example, I had a colleague, his secretary once said to him, "Have you gotten your Christmas tree yet?" And he said, "No, we don't have a Christmas tree." And she said, "Why not?" And he said, "'Cause we're Jewish." And she said, "They're not that expensive." But people here will be, I have a very Jewish name, and people here will be like, "Oh, you're Jewish? I didn't realize it." California and really the whole West Coast are very different from the East Coast and the Midwest, where people are acutely aware of everyone's ethnicity and religion. It's not so much a big deal here.
So tell us about your Jewish experience, not just the anti-Semitism, but how you're very connected and involved Jewishly here.
We're very lucky. Palo Alto is an unusual community, possibly a unique community in the United States. So the Bay Area generally has a large Jewish population. I think overall maybe 4th or 5th in the country. The vast majority of them are totally assimilated and have no real connection to religion, or at best they consider themselves cultural Jews, which means they like pastrami. In Palo Alto, there is a small but thriving Jewish community. It tends to be very transient because people come out here from New Jersey or New York to work at Google, Apple, or Meta for a few years, or to go to Stanford for a graduate degree for a few years. And then they often leave, but during their time here, they impact greatly the local Jewish culture. And so you have, even if some of these people are here for 3 or 4 years, they dive into the community and they help fashion it. So one way of thinking of the Jewish community in Palo Alto, it's like a pond. And instead of becoming brackish because there's no turnover, there are little streams and brooks flowing out of it as people leave, and there's fresh water coming in all the time from around the country, and many people coming here from Israel. So it's a vibrant Jewish community. It is, I'd be willing to bet, the most internally harmonious Jewish community in America. The people who go to Chabad are close to the people who go to Orthodox shuls. The people at conservative shuls get along with the people who are more observant and who are less observant. There aren't feuds between any of the rabbis at the different synagogues. People tend to celebrate things collectively across the community.
Why is that, do you think?
I think some of that is the personality of the rabbis here, who've shaped that a lot, and for whom that's always been a very high priority. I think part of it may be the transient nature of the population. Maybe when people flow through the community for 3 or 4 years, they don't have time for broiguses to harden the way they do in other communities. I think part of it is it's a very learning-oriented Jewish community across different levels of observance. So it's not just the Orthodox who are learning. There's learning in many different contexts here, and I think there's a lot of cross-pollination among the people. And then I think part of it is, in general, Californians are more chill. And so, wholly apart from the Jewish community, and I think the two of you have seen this just walking around to Shul and back yesterday. People say hello. People interact in a cordial way. And I think that has impact. You know, folks who grew up in New Jersey or in Philadelphia, and they come out here and people are very nice here. So I think that's been some of the impact. But I think the key is the rabbinic leadership in the Jewish community here, which is very tolerant. If you call our synagogue, which is Emek Bracha, Valley of Blessings, an obvious double entendre. If you call, the message says you've reached Congregation Emek Bracha, the Orthodox shul for everyone. That is typically not the business model of an Orthodox shul. It may be an Orthodox shul for people who are Sephardim, or an Orthodox shul for people who went to this yeshiva or that yeshiva, or Syrian Jews. And to have an Orthodox shul where we have people who have payas and black hats, and we have other people who drive and park down the block, and they're all in one synagogue together.
You were mentioning on the way to shul that people will schmooze and say hi, and a lot of those people are not Jewish, and some of those people don't even have homes. And seems that everybody knows you and they love you. So how do you get to know people? Is that through photography, or one of your incredible hobbies that you, more than a hobby that you have? Or is that how you get to know people?
So I do a lot of street photography, so I tend to get to know the homeless people, or as we're instructed to call them now, the unhoused people. And again, you see people on the street. If you reach out to them a little bit and treat them not as something where you need to avert your eyes, but you actually recognize that they're human beings and you engage with them, you can make a lot of nice friends.
Is that also, I noticed that your Shabbat table which is its own thing. And you and I were talking about this earlier, the importance of your Shabbat table. One of the things I'd like to commend you on is the richness of different kinds of people that are with different points of views at your table. How are you so tolerant?
I think we're very fortunate. We have many close friends here, and they are great at outreach to people who've maybe drifted away a little bit from Yiddishkeit. And so they get a lot of satisfaction when they say, oh, there's this person who was raised Jewish, but they married someone who wasn't Jewish and they've drifted away. Or they had a bad experience in a town they were at where they wanted to go to high holiday services and they were told they couldn't come unless they bought an expensive ticket. So when your friends bring new people, it tends to, again, it's like the community generally, it tends to refresh it. And I can tell that for many of the people who will join us for a Shabbat dinner, that it brings back a lot of happy memories for them. And they can remember a point in their life where either with relatives or friends or in the community, Shabbat meant something to them, and being around Jews meant something to them. And the funny thing is, lately, it is a blessing we've had often more Israelis at the Shabbat dinner. And it's sort of like hosting an honored guest, given everything going on in the Middle East now. But often we have people who aren't Jewish at the Shabbat dinners, and they become a little bit Jewish just by attending the dinner too.
Beautiful.
They eat kishke.
And if you're a listener who doesn't know what kishka is, start knowing what kishkas are. It really hits you in the kishka.
Exactly.
So another, we should say, we'd be remiss if we didn't say that for a long time now we are experiencing a very intense, frustrating war. Not just that our brothers and sisters in Israel, are facing directly with the terrorists, with Hamas and Gaza and with Hezbollah and Lebanon, and they're doing a fantastic job, I think, and fighting them. And of course, in Yemen and Syria, Iraq, all the tentacles of Iran. But even here, I mean, a lot of the frustration from that whole conflict even pours over, like you kind of alluded to, with the demonstrations, these strange bedfellows who are aligning themselves with really jihadist terrorists people on the left, on the far left especially, who are aligned that way. So we are in the midst of all that, and our eyes are kind of doing what we need to do here, and at the same time we're focusing on the fighting going on there and the struggles. How has that been part of what's happening for you on a day-to-day?
All of us here are spoiled because we're not in Israel, being shot at, having missiles fired at. I'm always put off a little bit when people who are in America have very strong views about what Israel should be doing, because we're not living there surrounded by 200 million enemies shooting stuff at us. But there are many ways to divide Jews. One way to divide Jews is those who are optimists and those who are pessimists. So I have friends who are worried that the current anti-Israeli sentiments, which often morph into anti-Semitism, reflect the end of the golden age of American Jewry. And they're planning to get houses here or there, or they're going to buy an apartment in Tel Aviv. I'm not pessimistic in that way at all. We're going through a difficult period, especially on college campuses, really mainly on college campuses. But I think that comparisons of this to Germany in the 30s are absurd. There's an entirely different political history and culture in this country. And we were founded on notions of tolerance. So I think the notion that because some idiot politicians, and you have many to choose from, are saying anti-Israel and anti-Semitic things, that Jews in America are in trouble, I think is just not right at all. The threat to Jews has changed dramatically. So in the 50s and 60s, the perceived focus of anti-Semitism was the far right. It was the John Birch Society, the Ku Klux Klan, Father Coughlin. Now, in many ways, the principal threat to Jews is from the far left, although as with many issues, often the far right and the far left join together at the bottom of the circle.
Because we can all agree that we hate Jews, right? That's kind
Exactly.
of
There's a popular book now by Dara Horn called Everyone Loves Dead Jews.
right.
And certainly among the far right and the far left, there's an element of that. But more concerning to me than the appearance, it's unfortunate that components of the left, BLM, other groups have become militantly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. More troubling than that is we seem to have lost a large portion of the younger Jewish community in America. And I think that we're going to get through Gaza, we're going to get through Lebanon. There will be a lot of healing required in Israel, which is itself a big, big issue. But in the U.S., the challenge really for the Jewish community is how did we lose the kids? You know, we thought sending them to Jewish camps and taking them on a trip to Israel would get them to buy into the prior generation's commitment to Israel. And instead, when you look at the public opinion surveys, which are often skewed and unreliable, but there's a large component, you can debate whether that's 20% or 50% of young Jews who don't really feel a connection to Israel and have absorbed the vacuous anti-colonialist rhetoric of the far left. So that could take decades to overcome. It might take generations to overcome. But that to me is a very high priority.
Thank you for listening to the Horizontal Conversations podcast brought to you by Horizontal Media. If you like what you hear, please rate us and spread the word. The best way to help support us is by becoming a member through the link to the Horizontal Media Patreon website. You can find that link in the show notes. By supporting us at Horizontal Media, not only will you be helping us achieve our goal of providing moving and meaningful content, but you will also gain access to occasional specials, exclusives, and a community discussion. And now, back to the conversation. You mentioned that these things are essentially on the college campuses. Like that's the heart of this far left anti-Jewish movement. But it does seem to be proliferating in the press. The legacy, the mainstream press is their line of questioning for the White House is often anti-Israel right off the bat with Israel's responses to its to the attacks from Gazans, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from the Iranian axis, the Houthis. Do you see any correlation with the media's messaging getting this anti-Jewish disposition into the mainstream?
Yes, they're key to it. I would have characterized it as the anti-Israel position. I think the stench of anti-Semitism is greater among some of the college groups and the demonstrators than it is among the press. I think that they tend to be a little more just anti-Israel and not as much anti-Semitic. But I'll give you a good example. On at the end of last week, there was an article, it was an analysis, which I guess means that it doesn't have to have the pretense of objectivity. There was an analysis in the New York Times about how Israel had continually escalated the stakes and the level of conflict in Lebanon over the prior week. And it went from pagers to walkie-talkies to bombing the meeting of the terrorists. The entire article did not once mention that 140 rockets had been shot into Israel that morning.
Right.
Didn't mention it. The New York Times, which used to be viewed as a Jewish-owned newspaper. So I think that the general media's hostility toward Israel is part of the left turning on Israel and falling for this anti-colonialist rhetoric. So yeah, I think the mainstream media has a lot to do with it. The fact that every time you read in the American media about alleged casualty figures in Gaza, they come from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is a Hamas organization. And they tend not to break out how many of the alleged casualties were of terrorists who invaded Israel. So yeah, I agree, the media, but I think the media issue is more of a reflection than it is a cause. I think the causes are much deeper, probably have more to do with domination by leftist ideology of the educational establishment from Montessori school through Graduate School of Sociology. At every point, with a few exceptions, people receive fundamentally an anti-American philosophy that's now spread toward anti-Israel as well, anti-West.
So you do separate anti-Israel with anti-Jewish, and I'm using terms like I have a little hang up with the term anti-Zionist and anti-Semitism as well. So I'm trying to sort of adjust the semantics to a different context. I have a in my viewpoint, there's a correlation between anti-Israel and anti-Jewish. That it may be an easy way to define political disposition as anti-Israel. However, in the greater context, being anti-Israel and having an agenda towards sort of demonizing Israeli policy ultimately becomes anti-Jewish. Is this something that I'm correlating, I'm miscorrelating, or?
No, I think it's a legitimate point of view. I think you have to be careful not to paint with too broad a brush. There are people with good hearts who disagree with Israeli policies. I don't think that disagreeing with Israel or disagreeing with Netanyahu means you're anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. I think there's a heavy overlap between anti-Israeli sentiment and anti-Semitism. I just don't think it's the perfect confluence.
But maybe it's
there's
an
a heavy
attrition
overlap
towards it.
There's a heavy overlap, and also as you move along, part of the way you can test that is see whether the person in question has any, do they condemn what Hamas did when they invaded and killed all the people and took them hostages, or do they just focus on what they say is a disproportionate response? Do they criticize Hamas for embedding itself in civilian populations?
Do they criticize any other country?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are struggling with the semantics, and because even the word Zionist, it's like, are we even Zionists anymore? Because we have Israel. We have to acknowledge that Israel exists. It's not that we think that Israel should exist. It does exist, and God willing, it will continue to exist. And now that kind of changes the semantics for us. We're struggling with this. How do we want to say that we are, Philo Israel, or?
Yeah, we don't have Americanism, right? I mean, as a definition of being pro-America. So Zionism as an ism, as a thing, is sort of a uncomfortable term, and it's been put in, it sort of conflates with this colonial oppressor narrative as if it's still trying to establish itself. So yeah, so we're
struggling with it,
wrestling with that concept, as ubiquitous as it is. Maybe there's other terms that we.
But this whole Israel, I mean, this is such a big part of being Jewish, and you mentioned the growing up with a certain kind of anti-Semitism that you experienced, that you lived through, and Israel has so much positivity, especially here in Silicon Valley. I mean, in terms of the startup nation and the innovation and everything, we see the partnership in that way, and we've been spending time talking about the downside, the negativity that's in a bad taste that people have in their mouths, and it's unfortunate. What would you like our listeners to better understand about Israel?
It's our greatest ally. If you're an American, look, Britain is great for us. Germany times is good for us. France, maybe, maybe not. Japan, yes. We have a lot. We're blessed with many allies around the world. But you could argue that Israel is in many ways the one most like America, and that would never turn on the United States no matter what, is an astonishing democracy, has had incredible achievements. And I think especially for if there are any non-Jewish listeners here, first of all, stop eating so much mayonnaise. And the second...
More mustard, huh?
More this deli mustard. Second, Israel wants peace more than anyone. There were articles the last few days from various anti-Israeli UN people and world leaders saying, we demand a ceasefire in Lebanon. Nobody wants a ceasefire in Lebanon as much as Israel. Nobody. And if the UN could get Hezbollah to stop firing rockets across the border, there would be a ceasefire today. There would be no more fighting on the border there. Even though Israel would like to have a buffer zone and move some of the rockets back.
And release the hostages, of course.
But on Lebanon, not Gaza.
Right.
On Lebanon, if they stopped firing the rockets, that war would be over today. So I think one of the keys is, even if, part of the problem is that in America, people who hate Trump have transferred that hatred to Netanyahu. So you have Netanyahu derangement syndrome.
Is that like psychological transference then?
Yes, exactly. And that it's also a big factor in Israel, is my sense. So what I would hope that people who have an open heart and an open mind would look at is, whether you agree with this facet of Israeli policy or that, fundamentally, they want peace more than anyone in the Middle East. And when you're surrounded by 200 million enemies, it's tough to ignore.
We have so many kind of pieces on, don't get me started on that, like the Jewish refugees from Arab countries, the million of them who are now the majority of the population in Israel. Anyhow, nobody talks about, the people that were driven out, and we've talked about that, and we'll continue to talk about that, but we don't want to get too sidetracked on all the different little points on the Israel discussion. Just we want to kind of bring it back to technology too, not just Yiddishkeit, but also technology, but kind of just maybe you think it's a silly question, but it's becoming more and more, especially with AI and all sorts of things. What are your feelings on the virtual minion, for example?
So to me, look, there are many ways for people to observe religion, and if it works for them and their community, geh gesund to hate. But the worst thing about COVID for me, the worst, was that we didn't go to shul every Saturday. That Santa Clara County was super anti-COVID and anti-religion, both. Not just for the Jews, but they shut down churches. They arrested people who had church services. So for me, the worst part was that, and because we're an Orthodox shul, we did not have virtual services. And the worst part was not being there with people. My Talmud class, which meets at Freshfields in the room we're in now once a week.
This is a holy room because of that,
Exactly.
actually.
It's a learned room. So we shifted from having an in-person Talmud class every week with the vast majority of the people in the room touching each other in only a few and remote locations on a screen to everybody being on a screen. It was totally unsatisfying. So I think it varies by people. It's not a halachic issue to me because there are different branches of Judaism with different rules, and if a particular shul decides it's okay for them, it's okay. I worry that for those shuls that have moved to a virtual minyan, they're creating their own future obsolescence. Because, okay, so you don't need to get up earlier on Saturday and drive to shul or walk to shul. You can just flip on your computer, and then while you're doing it, you're sort of checking email, and then it just sort of keeps going lower and lower. It's like, historically, many students of the American Jewish community believe that one of the seminal negative events was when the conservative movement allowed Jews to drive their cars to the synagogue on Saturday. Because until then, Jews tended to live in clustered neighborhoods, walking distance from their shul. And once they could drive to shul, they tended to spread out, and you lost a lot of Jewish neighborhoods. I think especially, maybe not so much in New York and New Jersey, but in the Midwest, a lot of people who'd been in sort of Jewish neighborhoods, they could move out a little farther. So I worry that virtual minyanim go a step beyond that. On the other hand, for people, for example, who are saying Kaddish, and they can't make it to shul every day, for them it's better than not having the option of saying Kaddish.
Mm-hmm. Is there a place for Jewish thought and Torah-driven ideas within the high-paced innovation space?
The tech world is not a Jewish world. It's not an anti-Jewish world. There are many entrepreneurs and founders who are Jewish, but it's not really a sector. You could argue it's the most important sector of the American economy now. I'm biased on that because it's been my whole career, but you look at the entertainment industry, it's Jewish. You look at some other industries in different places, fashion/schmuck is historically a Jewish industry. Tech is not a Jewish industry. It's an extraordinarily diverse industry. In many ways, the most important CEOs in the tech world today were all born in India. Remarkable. Came here as immigrants, and they're running the most important technology companies in the world. So lots of diversity, strong Indian component, strong Asian component, lots of Israelis. But I don't think that Jewish leaders as such have been, they're not traditionally associated with the tech industry. There are lots of Jews who work for the technology companies, but I don't think it's been a sector that's been impacted by Jewish beliefs or culture.
You think it maybe can be or should be as innovation speeds forward on this high trajectory? Ethics and law are chasing the tail a lot. Is there maybe a place in the think tanks for like a Maimonidean type thought, or
No, tech is its own religion.
Is that so?
It's a-religious. It has some of the characteristics of religion. It is, I think, that's not to say
Are these
that,
topics of ethics on the table in general as...
Not so much. I know I have 50 clients now firing me because I said ethical considerations aren't high. Tech didn't have a lot of the ethical issues that other industries had. So when I started as a lawyer, the firm I worked with represented cigarette companies in cancer lawsuits. Or you may represent old line manufacturing industries that have big pollution problems. That's not really tech. You can people argue about competition and privacy issues, but they're not really life and death issues.
Well, we have addiction issues, we have speech issues on the internet, right? Like truth. How do we correlate this problem of, false information proliferating, or the speech, so to speak, of an algorithm that promotes dangerous things to young children?
Those are important issues. I don't think they're Jewish issues. I think that they're ideological. Content, in some ways, a major issue in the technology world and an important issue as we embark on the AI world. An important issue is content regulation. Fundamentally, there was an important First Amendment theorist named Alexander Michaeljohn, whose view is essentially the best antidote to bad speech is more speech, not outlawing the bad speech. But in America, there's a fundamental split in society over what you raise, over content regulation. So you and your listeners may have heard about Section 230 of the Communications Act. It gives immunity to platforms. So if there's a social network and you post something stupid and actionable on it, the platform's not responsible. 230 gives them immunity. So if you polled Congress, you'd probably get 80 or 90% that say, we hate 230, it must be amended. So why haven't they done anything on 230? Because half of them are liberals who think that the tech companies should censor much more speech. And the other half are conservatives who think that the liberals at the tech companies just want to silence conservative voices. So they're never going to agree on content regulation. The only areas where they've encroached on 230 are apple pie and Americanism, namely kiddie porn, trying to groom young people, solicit them. There have been limited incursions on 230 on things that everyone can agree with, like abuse of young or especially vulnerable people. But it's why I think there will be limited to no meaningful regulation of AI in the US. Because, so part of AI regulation is just quote unquote transparency. So you may already have seen, you're gonna start seeing a lot, at the bottom of every article, it'll say, this article may have been contributed to in part by artificial intelligence. So there are now some transparency laws passing that require you to say whether AI contributed. If you've noticed when you go into buildings in California, every building has a little sign that says Prop 65 warning. Proposition 65 said if you have carcinogens in a building, you have to warn people. So what did people do? They put a Prop 65 notice on every building, right?
Becomes ubiquitous.
It's like when he serves cholent, it says may contain peanuts, right? Because why not?
We should, we don't say.
Even though it doesn't have peanuts. So there's the transparency branch of AI regulation. Not really meaningful, it'll become just a boilerplate thing. If you want to have real regulation of AI, as you said, what if it's just making up lies that are going to hurt people, that's just another name for content regulation. And apart from the First Amendment considerations in whether government can regulate that, I don't think we're going to have a consensus on that. Europe, by contrast, is much more strongly in favor of content regulation. So you may see some of the things you're talking about emerging either from the EU or in the UK. But in the US, I think you're going to see a lot of lip service about AI regulation, but it won't have a lot of meaningful impact, which is good because even if the West could agree on substantive, stringent regulation of AI, that leaves a free hand for China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
They're going to continue.
And then they can zoom past us. Every piece of AI regulation should be called the Help China Pass Us in AI Act, because they're not going to be subject to it.
Isn't that kind of the same with all the other rules that people care about, like whether it's recycling or other environmental considerations? If China and India are not a part of it, like what does it? And certainly other nefarious regimes like Iran who couldn't care less. What difference does it make if the United States people here are, very meticulous about their plastics or whatever?
I don't want to arouse Greta Thunberg and look outside my door and see her picketing. So I'm not going to touch that with your 10-foot pole.
Okay,
Fair enough.
How about some negative impact? Do you have any view on the negative impact of technology, aside from what we've touched on with, keeping people from getting together and...
I think like all major phenomena, whether they're social or technological, yesterday's Parsha had the blessing and the curse. So that's true with technology. It's true, maybe the greatest...
Beyond social isolation, technology
So
can
there you
negatively
go.
impact.
That's perfect.
And that was my phone listening to us, and Mr. Gemini Advanced started talking. I don't want you now, Gemini. So
Intrusion.
you can argue that the greatest scientific advance of the last century has been advances in agriculture, which have largely, apart from sort of localized wars, the world has more food than it's ever had. And so the whole crowd that complains about GMO and this and that, and we've sort of defeated starvation. Or if you look at many illnesses that used to kill a lot of people, widespread vaccinations sort of eliminated those. So you can't say universally tech is good or tech is bad.
Just neutral?
It is. And there are ways in which it can be used in an incredibly beneficial way for people in society. And there are the ways in which it can be negative. But I do think most people, if you gave them a choice, an informed choice between living now and living in the Middle Ages, or living now and living in the 1800s, wholly apart from political and social trends, just day-to-day life, I think most people would say, I'd rather have it now, even though cancer rates have increased because of plastic water bottles. But yeah, there are externalities to every new kind of technology. With AI, we've already seen, just in the year and a half since generative AI became a popular topic, we've already seen ludicrous extremes of both the blessing and the curse. So people who say this will change all life, people won't have to work hard or work at all, it solves all these problems. And other people who say civilizational risk, AI will take over the nuclear weapons and destroy the world. There's a lot of hype at both ends. What we know is it will evolve rapidly. It will have externalities and uses that we can't remotely contemplate today, that we're in the very early days of it, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
have in our tradition, as you well know, a mechanism which allows us to enjoy the Sabbath, enjoy Shabbat in our homes, and to be able to do things, to schlep things that we wouldn't be able to schlep out and about. We can pick up a chair and move it over to the corner. We can carry, whereas our tradition frowns upon carrying in the public domain or in other kinds of domains. And we have something that is an ancient mechanism called the eruv, which makes a mixture of the outdoor space or increases the private domain of an individual so that one can carry in a larger area. And actually, I was just thinking about that because the technology of how we build an eruv using a fishing line is also, using something today which is so almost unseen, invisible rather, some would call it a legal fiction, but it's an important feature for observant Jews to be able to carry on the Sabbath from their home to the synagogue to push a stroller. You, Boris Feldman, have an important role that you played. You shared with me about the eruv that was built right here in Palo Alto. Do you want to share about the sagas of the eruv?
So start at 10,000 feet up. People who hate Jews always try to defeat the religion by outlawing things that the religion requires. That's why over the millennia, the Greeks and others outlawed circumcision, right?
Which is really what got you started.
Exactly, I'm still recovering. 69 years later, I'm still recovering from that bris.
You look great, by the way.
All the guys were looking down and covering their lap, and all the women were smiling. Or you'll see now in countries people trying to outlaw ritual slaughter of animals, which means you couldn't have kosher meat. So enemies of Judaism and Jews always know where to probe. And so in peaceful, liberal, tolerant Palo Alto, we had our version of a civil war over an eruv, which is spelled E-R-U-V. It's not A-R-A-B. It's eruv, not Arab. And so halachically, it's actually an interesting subject for people to study. There's an entire tractate of the Talmud called Tractate Eruvim. The concept is, on the Sabbath, you shouldn't carry things outside an enclosed space. So if you were in a home which is built around a courtyard and there's a community there, you can carry around inside it. Long ago, rabbis ruled that you could enclose a larger space by creating a boundary around it. It didn't have to be a wall. It could be rope.
A series of doors, essentially.
Exactly. So for observant Jews, non-observant Jews tend to deride it as a loophole and as stupid. In fact, in the political battles we had, the then mayor of Palo Alto said, why can't you just have a virtual eruv where you just have a beam of light instead of a physical
connection? That's a good idea, actually. I like that idea.
And they said, because halachically, that doesn't satisfy the requirement. And he responded, the rabbis created the loophole, they can change the loophole.
As soon as we reconfigure the Sanhedrin, then we can take that matter up.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So for observant Jews, it's really important because without it, you can't carry anything on the Sabbath, you can't use a wheelchair, you can't use crutches, and you can't use a baby stroller. So Palo Alto some time ago decided that as the observant community here grew, they needed an eruv. I was not involved in that. There were a number of leaders in the community. They had tried for 7 years to get the Palo Alto City Council to approve an ordinance, in the little local rags that they hand out on newsstands for free, there were lots of headlines about the Jew Eruv. There were people outside shopping centers with tables. I think it was the Atheists of America, which is an organization, with signs saying, "Stop the Jew Eruv." Many of the most vociferous opponents of it were liberal, non-observant Jews who were embarrassed that these Neanderthals needed a piece of string to be able to carry stuff on Shabbat. So it really tore the community apart for about 7 years. And when the resolution actually finally came before the city council for a vote, it died for lack of a second.
Wow. What year was that?
I don't remember the years. I'll look it up. So that had gone on for 7 years, and it unleashed just two waves of hostility. One was from real Jew haters, and the other was from Jews who were embarrassed by all these nutty Orthodox Jews trying to get their piece of string. And then I connected with the rabbi who'd been leading this, and we decided, it then took us 4 years before we got it. We decided, first of all, we needed to go stealth, that having this in the papers every day was a bad thing, not just for the Arab, but for the Jewish community. So we needed to get rid of the headlines and go underground. Second, we decided that instead of everybody who was in the stories or who was a spokesman being rabbi this or rabbi that and having payas and a shtreimel, we needed blondes named Muffy to do it because it sort of shifted the discourse. And we decided to make it a disability rights issue and not a religious freedom issue, because a lot of liberals don't like religions. Not all, many are great about it, but a lot of the anti-religious part of this came from the left, but they care a lot about disability rights issues. So one of the themes we started using is there are people who use wheelchairs or crutches, and it wasn't just about going to the synagogue. They couldn't go to the park on Saturday because they couldn't use that. And then we were very lucky. There was an important judicial decision involving Tenafly or Teaneck. It's whichever one doesn't have a big Jewish community. I think it was Tenafly. And in many of the judicial decisions, it's been non-observant Jews who fought the Eruv. And I think that was the case in Tenafly. In Tenafly, some of the people who opposed the Eruv thought it would bring the wrong kind of Jews to the community because they'd be more observant. That was true in the Hamptons also when they tried to get an Eruv. It was the Jews who opposed getting an Eruv in the Hamptons because it would bring more observant Jews out there. So Tenafly, there was a strong decision saying it's a First Amendment violation to block this. We decided that the approach was not to go to the city council, to get it done without the city council. We went to the engineering department. And we said, we need a variance to allow us to put up these poles to connect the wires. So building the Eruv, 95% of it was pre-existing structures. The highways in Palo Alto have sound walls. Those can all be part of the Eruv. Creek beds can be part of the Eruv. So what you needed to do was connect them, and there are halachic rules for how you connect them, but basically we would install tall metal poles there and connect them with fishing line. At first, the Eruv committee, it's called PACE, Palo Alto Community Eruv. At first, they wanted to use existing utility poles to connect them, and the city came up with a bogus objection that violated the state utility law because you couldn't have anything attached to street lamps or utility poles. If you drive around Palo Alto today, you'll see on every street lamp there's some banner about this art festival or that street fair. So that was bogus. That was
and of course they achieved this in Los Angeles, so it can't be a state problem.
Correct. So we decided, we made a tactical decision, you know what, we'll put up our own poles, even though the committee then had to raise a lot more money and install the poles, but the view was okay. And we were very lucky. I often tell my kids, when you need it, God sends you a Jew. So at that time, the new mayor in Palo Alto was a Jewish woman, a lawyer, and she went with us to the city engineering department. And I didn't threaten to sue them. What I said was, if the atheists sue you over this, my law firm is prepared to spend $3 million defending you. We will intervene. We will defend the law. You won't have to defend it. The less warm way of looking at that is, and if you don't, we'll sue you and we'll, but there was really no basis for them to reject it. And so they approved it. It needed final city council approval, but it was all done in stealth mode. So we got it all through, and then we needed permissions from all the landowners. Much of this was happening on Stanford land, a huge portion of it. And people, someone had ties to someone in the Stanford General Counsel's office. They got sign off. We needed the Santa Clara County Water District. Somebody reached out to them, we got sign off. We needed a lot of residents to say, you can walk past, you can have the string go around our house. My wife and I, with whichever of our kids was then in a stroller, would go knocking on doors and say, oh, we've got this thing. And we always pitched it as a disability issue, not a Jewish issue. And then, so we were getting approvals from everybody. And then we ran into an Amalekite at the Caltrans, State Department of Transportation. If you're not familiar with Amalekites, Google it. And he blocked it. And so then we had to appeal over him. That's why our part of it from the time I got involved took another 4 years.
Because of the Amalekites.
Till we finally got approval from the State Department of Transportation. And it was all assembled and operating. Our rabbi, Rabbi Feldman, still every Friday afternoon drives the boundary to make sure that it's all up. There's a dial-in number you can check to call before Shabbat to confirm that the Eruv's up. It's online. I think there may be a website you can check too, but it dramatically transformed the observant community in Palo Alto. First of all, it's a welcoming message. I joke that it's like a mezuzah on the door of Palo Alto, because whether you're driving up Sand Hill Road from the venture capitalists or down University Drive from the highway, you see these little metal poles and you see a piece of string. It means Jews are welcome in Palo Alto. And it meant before then there were relatively few babies and toddlers at the synagogue on Shabbat, because some of these families have multiple young kids. You can't carry them all. Mm-hmm. But once you can have strollers, so now I think you saw at the synagogue yesterday, the reception hall must have had 30 strollers, 40 strollers in it, a couple wheelchairs, a couple walkers, and that's all because of the Eruv.
It's a beautiful, gratifying work that you, I hope it was gratifying.
It was a big, you know the expression takes a village. It took a shtetl, but they managed to get it and they keep it going and funded, and you know, there'll be a storm and the branches will knock down part of the wire and people go and fix it.
So we're coming up to our time limit. You've been very generous to not only give us this time to talk with you, but to invite us to your home for Shabbat and feed us so heartily, and spend time walking around the farmer's market with us. And I think we're going to visit Oktoberfest after this.
Jawohl.
And so one final question from me. Maybe Rabbi Avi has another question. Do you have any reading recommendations for me or our audience? What do you like to read? What should we get our faces into, aside from our phones and AI?
I'm a fiction reader, so I won't have any good nonfiction recommendations for you. I think it's always, I'm partial, as you may be, as somebody who grew up Jewish in America in the 60s, 70s. I'm very partial to the key Jewish authors like Philip Roth, controversial in some quarters. I just started rereading The Plot Against America, which is an alternative history in which Charles Lindbergh wins the presidential election.
Oh my goodness.
And America takes a very rightward, not really rightward, a very isolationist, anti-Semitic path. And it's very good.
Nazi-esque.
Yeah, but if you grew up in a Jewish home in America, it's hard not to relate to many of the things in Philip Roth.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. We hope
Pleasure.
to continue our conversation with you. And we pray that you will have many other blessings and not curveballs like you experienced with the Eruv project, not the negative curveballs, but you should have some smooth sailing. We should all have smooth sailing, and we continue to pray and demand a peaceful time, a quiet time, and a prosperous time for all of us.
Amen,
Amen.
amen, amen.
But if those curveballs do arrive, we're happy that you're at the plate, behind the plate.
That's right.
And involved. So
Thank you.
thank you so much.
If you like what you hear, please rate us and spread the word. The best way to help support us is by becoming a member through the link to the Horizontal Media Patreon website. You can find that link in the show notes. By supporting us at Horizontal Media, not only will you be helping us achieve our goal of providing moving and meaningful content, but you will also gain access to occasional specials, exclusives, and a community discussion. Thank you for listening to the Horizontal Conversations podcast, brought to you by Horizontal Media.